Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a truly fascinating stack of sources today, all centering on one of humanity's oldest and, well, most persistent questions. Is there something that continues after this life?
hmm
Specifically, we're diving into research and accounts related to the possibility of reincarnation and what, if anything, happens in that space, between lives.
That's right. And we're looking at quite a mix of material here. There's decades of systematic psychological research focusing on children who spontaneously claim to remember past lives.
Right.
Then there are these really compelling case studies, some with just astonishing details. And we'll even touch on explorations into potential experiences between incarnations, often accessed through methods like hypnosis.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We want to navigate this, well, really complex subject, pull out the most important insights that these sources present.
Yeah, look at the claims, the evidence they offer, also the criticisms, which are important.
Absolutely. And the different perspectives on what it all might actually mean. We want to give you a distilled understanding, hopefully, of the key findings without getting totally lost.
Exactly. And, one source quotes Haruki Murakami saying, even chance meetings are the result of karma. Things in life are fated by our previous lives.
Hmm.
Now, that's just one perspective, of course, but it captures the kind of idea we're exploring the research around. This notion of consciousness continuing, a connection beyond just one lifetime, that's what these sources are grappling with, using data and reported experiences.
It really is. So where do we even begin to tackle a subject like this? It feels huge.
Well, I think it helps to first acknowledge the sheer depth of history here. Belief in reincarnation isn't some fringe New Age thing.
No, not at all.
It's been a significant part of many cultures and religions for literally millennia. You find it with the ancient Greeks, various African traditions, Amerindian people.
And obviously central in Hinduism and Buddhism.
Right, and even some Christian groups historically held similar beliefs. It's widespread.
And it's definitely not obsolete today, is it? I mean, surveys still show a pretty significant chunk of the population, like nearly 25% in places like the US and Europe, expressing some belief in it.
It was that enduring belief, really, plus all these anecdotal accounts floating around that eventually led to more systematic investigation in modern times.
And that brings us to Dr. Ian Stevenson.
Exactly. A pivotal figure. He was a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia who really started spearheading this research back in the 1960s.
And that work is still going on today, right? Through the Division of Perceptual Studies, or DUPS, now headed by Dr. Jim Tucker, I believe.
That's the one. And what's really striking is the sheer scale of their work. Over 50 years, researchers there have identified and, importantly, investigated over 2,500 cases.
2,500, wow.
Yeah, cases of children who claim to remember previous lives. It's a huge database.
How do they even find these cases? Do families just call them up?
Often it happens more organically, especially in cultures where belief in reincarnation is more common, like parts of Asia. Reports might surface in local newspapers, or it could just be word of mouth. Someone hears about a young child talking very specifically about a life they supposedly lived before.
Okay, so a potential case comes to their attention. What then? How do researchers like those at DUPS actually investigate it? What's the process to go from a child's claim to something that researchers consider a compelling case?
Well, it's a really painstaking process, and it's all focused on verification. First, the child provides details about the supposed past life, if those details are specific enough.
Like names, places, how they died.
Exactly, things that can potentially be checked. Then the current family, or sometimes the researchers directly, try to identify a deceased person whose life actually matches those specific details. Then the researchers will typically visit the child's family. They meticulously document everything the child has said, the statements about the previous life, any unusual behaviors the child exhibits, phobias, unusual skills, even physical characteristics like birthmarks.
And the verification step is crucial, I imagine. Checking those claims against the facts of the deceased person's life.
Absolutely crucial. They'll try to track down surviving family members of the deceased person, interview them, look for historical records, birth certificates, death certificates, newspaper articles, anything relevant.
Even medical records.
Yes, sometimes even medical or autopsy reports, if they're available and relevant, especially if the child talks about dying from specific injuries. The goal is to see just how many of the child's specific, often unusual statements and behaviors actually align with the known facts of that particular deceased individual's life.
And you mentioned birthmarks. That physical evidence seems to be a recurring theme they look for.
It really is. In a significant number of cases, children report dying, often violently, in the previous life. Researchers then look very closely for birthmarks or sometimes congenital abnormalities on the child that correspond in location and maybe even appearance to wounds or injuries sustained by the deceased person.
Wow.
And verifying those physical marks against medical documentation, if it exists, from the previous life, that's a very specific, very powerful type of corroboration they seek.
Okay, that gives us a really good sense of the historical context and the research methodology. It sounds incredibly thorough.
It has to be, given the nature of the claims.
Right. So let's dive into some of the specific case studies that are detailed in the sources, because this is where it gets really fascinating, I think.
Absolutely. And one thing you see consistently is that these cases almost always involve very young children. Typically, they start talking about these things between the ages of 2 and 4.
That's really young.
It is, and that's often when the memories seem most vivid, most accessible to them. It's also quite notable that these claims and the behaviors that go with them usually fade away by the time the children are about 6 or 7.
Why then do they think?
Well, the thinking is that as they become more integrated into their current lives, start formal schooling, learn more about the world around them, those apparent past life memories tend to recede.
And it's not just kids saying things, right? The sources talk about striking behaviors too.
Oh, definitely. It's often much more than just words. Children might express this really intense longing, sometimes crying, to go home to their former family.
That must be distressing for the current parents.
Immensely. They might also develop really specific phobias that seem directly related to how the previous person died, like a fear of heights if the claim is they fell, or a fear of water if they drowned. Some children even compulsively act out the scene of the death over and over. And if the previous person was supposedly murdered, the child might show real anger or fear towards the alleged killer if they encounter them or even see a picture.
Goodness. And what about preferences?
Yeah, that's another interesting aspect. They might have very specific, unusual preferences for foods the previous person loved. Maybe foods that are completely uncommon for a young child or not part of their current family's diet at all. Even things like tobacco or alcohol in some cases, which is startling.
In recognition. Do they seem to recognize people or places?
Sometimes, yes. When taken to the location where the previous person lived, some children seem to spontaneously recognize former family members, friends, or specific locations, even pointing out changes that have occurred since the previous person's death.
Okay, let's get specific. The sources detail the case of Kemal Atasoy, researched by Jürgen Keil. This one sounds particularly compelling because of the distances involved and the sheer number of details.
Yes, this is a really striking one. Kemal was a 6-year-old Turkish boy living with his family, described as upper middle class, about 800 kilometers away from Istanbul.
So quite a distance.
A huge distance. And from the age of 2, he insisted that he used to live in Istanbul and that his name was Karakas.
Karakas. And he gave quite a few specific details about this Karakas person's life, didn't he?
He really did. Very specific details. He said he'd been a wealthy Armenian Christian. He described living in a large 3-story house right by the water with boats moored nearby and a church behind the house. He mentioned a specific neighbor named Icicle.
Icicle, okay.
He also said he only lived there seasonally, part of the year, that he used to carry a large leather bag for his work, and that his wife had a Greek name.
That's a lot of specific information for a young child living 800 kilometers away. And his current family.
They were Turkish, not Armenian. They had absolutely no connections to Istanbul, no Armenian friends or acquaintances. They were, understandably, very skeptical about the whole thing.
So how did the researcher, Keil, approach this?
Well, Keil took these specific details seriously. He actually traveled to Istanbul. And incredibly, he started searching in the area described and found a house that matched the description perfectly. 3 stories, right by the water, boats nearby, a church behind it.
No way.
Yes. And right next door was a house owned by someone named Icicle.
He found Icicle.
He did. And an old man living nearby confirmed that, yes, an Armenian family had lived in that specific house years ago.
Wow. But did he find Karakas?
Not on that first trip, but the verification went even deeper. Keil returned the following year, and this time she consulted a local historian.
Right.
And the historian confirmed that, yes, a wealthy Armenian Christian merchant named Karakas had indeed lived in that very house. He confirmed Karakas carried a large leather bag, that his wife was Greek Orthodox, that they only lived there in the summer months, and that he had died sometime in the early 1940s.
Which would be about 50 years before Kemal was born.
Exactly. So you have this young boy, hundreds of kilometers away, no known connections, providing numerous, very specific details about a historical individual name, religion, location, house details, neighbor's name, wife's background, possessions, seasonal habits, all of which researchers were able to verify independently.
So the obvious question is, how could Kemal possibly know all these very specific things?
Well, the child's explanation was straightforward. He said he was Carica's. From the researcher's perspective, it's a data point that's very hard to explain through conventional means like fraud, guessing, or the family somehow knowing and coaching him.
It really is quite a case. The sources highlight other powerful ones too, like the Druze boy and the Golan Heights. That one involved physical evidence right from the start, didn't it?
It did, yes. This was a 3-year-old boy from the Druze community, and it's worth noting the Druze have a strong traditional belief in reincarnation. He was born with a long, distinct red birthmark on his head.
Okay.
And this little boy claimed that in his previous life he had been killed by a blow to the head with an axe.
Oh my goodness. An axe.
And did he know where he'd lived before?
Yes, he named the village he said he came from. His parents, believing in reincarnation, actually took him there. Once in the village, he remembered the name of the person he claimed to have been.
And did people there know that name?
Yes, a villager confirmed that a man with that name had lived there, but had disappeared about 4 years prior. Nobody knew what had happened to him.
But the boy knew more.
He did. He then gave the full name of the man he claimed was his murderer, and he led them to the house where he said he used to live.
Wow. So this led to some kind of confrontation.
Apparently, yes. The story goes that the boy was walking with some village elders, including the man he had accused. He recognized the man, walked right up to him, and said something like, "I know you. I was your neighbor. We fought, and you killed me with an axe."
Just like that, a 3-year-old.
Just like that. And the physical evidence became absolutely crucial here.
The birthmark.
And more. The boy then led the elders to a specific spot, saying that's where his body was buried. They dug there.
And they found a skeleton. The skull had an injury, a wound that perfectly matched the location and shape of the boy's birthmark. They also found an axe buried nearby.
Unbelievable. And what happened to the accused man?
The sources report that, faced with this evidence, the boy's accusation, the matching birthmark, the skeleton with the corresponding injury, the axe the man confessed to the murder, Dr. Eli Lash, a physician known for his interest in these cases, was apparently involved in documenting this one.
That combination, the specific memory, the identification, the physical evidence, the confession, it's incredibly compelling.
It certainly is. It makes simple dismissal very difficult.
Let's look at one more case from the sources. This one from Sri Lanka, Sujith Jaratne. This one also has a lot of detail.
Yes, Sujith was a boy from Colombo. His parents noticed he developed an intense, inexplicable fear of trucks when he was just 8 months old.
8 months, before he could even talk properly.
Exactly. And as soon as he could talk, he started claiming he had lived before in a village called Gorakana, about 10 kilometers away. And he said he had died there after being hit by a truck.
Ah, the truck connection.
Precisely. And he didn't just say that. He provided an absolutely astonishing amount of detail about this supposed past life.
Like what?
Well, he gave a name he said was his Sammy, sometimes adding Gorakana Sammy. He described his father, Jameis, mentioning he had eye problems. He talked about a dilapidated school near his house named the teacher, Francis. He recalled giving money to a relative named Kusuma, describing her thick hair and that she made rice noodles.
These are such specific, mundane details in a way.
They really are. He described the layout of his house whitewash, toilets near the fence. He talked about bathing with fresh water, giving money to a temple in the forest where there were 2 monks, one named Amitha. He told many of these details to a local monk who actually recorded them.
Wow. And there was more.
Yes, he told his family more details too. About his wife, Maggie, and his daughter, Nandani. He said he worked for the railways, had climbed Adams Peak, a famous pilgrimage site. He even admitted to transporting illegal Arak local liquor and recalled his boat capsizing once. He remembered arguing with Maggie on the very day he died, going to a shop, and then being hit by the truck.
That is an incredible volume of specific claims. How much of it could actually be verified?
A researcher, prompted by the monk's record, investigated in Gorakana. They found that, yes, a 50-year-old man named Sammy Fernando, who was indeed known locally as Gorakana Sammy, had died after being hit by a truck.
When?
About 6 months before Sujith was born. And crucially, nearly all the specific details Sujith had provided about Sammy's family members, Father Jameis with eye trouble, wife Maggie, daughter Nandani, his occupation with the railways, the house details, the arak smuggling, the argument, even the teacher Francis and relative Kusuma, they were all verified as accurate for Sammy Fernando's life. The only slight discrepancy was that Sammy didn't die instantly. He died hours later in the hospital.
Almost everything matched. And did Sujith show any recognition or specific behaviors?
Yes. When taken to Gorakhana, he apparently identified Sammy's family members correctly and pointed out changes that had been made to Sammy's house since his death. And the behavioral matches were quite strong, too.
Like what?
Sujith would often pretend to drink arak, even acting drunk. He actively sought out liquor and cigarettes, which was completely out of character for his own family's background, but very much in character for Sammy, who was known to be a heavy drinker.
That's striking in the young child.
Very. He also demanded the specific spicy foods that Sammy loved, foods rarely eaten in Sujith's own home, and he apparently had a tendency to swear and be aggressive sometimes, mimicking behavior Sammy was known for when he was drunk.
So again, you have this convergence. Specific verified memories, recognition, and matching unusual behaviors.
Exactly. Ian Stevenson himself investigated this case about a year later, interviewing around 35 people connected to it, further corroborating the links. These cases, with their rich, verifiable details, the emotional and behavioral components, and sometimes those physical correlates like birthmarks, they form the core empirical foundation for this line of research.
They really do. The sources really emphasize that the consistent appearance of these specific birthmarks or congenital anomalies that seem to match injuries from the claimed previous life. Well, that's a particularly intriguing form of physical evidence that any explanation needs to account for.
It's one of the hardest aspects to explain away through purely psychological or social mechanisms.
Which brings us back nicely to the Patrick Christensen case, which the sources detail. Here, this physical correlation was apparently quite pronounced.
Yes, Patrick was born in Michigan in 1991. His mother described having this strong feeling, this sense of connection to her first son, Kevin. Kevin had tragically died 12 years earlier at age 2 from cancer. And Patrick was born with not one, but 3 distinct congenital anomalies, birth defects, that precisely matched significant medical events in Kevin's short, illness-marked life.
3 specific matches. Let's quickly run through Kevin's medical history again just to understand what those marks relate to.
Okay. So Kevin developed cancer. As part of his treatment, he had a biopsy taken from a nodule on his scalp just above his right ear. He also received chemotherapy through a catheter, which was inserted into a vein on the right side of his neck.
Right.
And later, sadly, the cancer spread. A tumor behind his left eye caused it to bulge and bruise, and eventually, due to corneal leukemia, he became almost completely blind in that left eye just before he passed away.
So, a scalp biopsy, a neck catheter insertion site, and severe left eye problems. How did Patrick's birth defects match these?
It was remarkably precise, according to the reports. Patrick had a sloping birthmark on the lower right side of his neck, described as a small, dark line, looking like a healed cut exactly where Kevin's chemotherapy catheter had been inserted.
Wow.
He also had a small nodule, a lump, on his scalp, in the very same location where Kevin had his biopsy scar.
The exact spot.
Exactly. And perhaps most significantly, Patrick was born with a cataract in his left eye, causing opacity of the cornea and rendering him almost completely blind in that eye, mirroring Kevin's severe left eye condition caused by the tumor and leukemia.
3 distinct physical marks, precisely matching 3 specific documented medical events or conditions from the deceased brother's life. That's quite something.
It is. And just like the children in other cases, Patrick also began making statements as he got a bit older that seemed to relate directly to Kevin's life.
What kind of things did he say?
Around age 4.5, he started talking about wanting to go back to their old house, saying he left her there, meaning his mother. He described the old house correctly as being orange and brown. He once asked his mother if she remembered the operation and pointed directly to the spot above his right ear where Kevin had the biopsy.
He pointed to the spot corresponding to his own scalp nodule.
Exactly. And another time, he saw a photograph of Kevin and simply said that it was him.
This case is highlighted, I think you mentioned, in Stevenson's big book, Reincarnation and Biology.
Precisely because of this strong combination of specific physical evidence verified by medical records, alongside the corresponding statements and behavioral indicators, the level of documentation, checking Kevin's medical files, Patrick's eye exams, photographing the marks, It makes cases like this very difficult for the researchers involved to just dismiss as coincidence.
It really forces the question, doesn't it? How do you explain such specific physical matches appearing congenitally, alongside verbal claims that echo the life associated with those physical traumas in a child born years later with no ordinary way of knowing?
That's the central puzzle these cases present.
So while many of these cases focus on memories of a past physical life on Earth, the sources also touch briefly on something even more unusual: reported memories from the interval between incarnations.
Yes, that's a less common feature, but it does occur in some of these spontaneous childhood cases. Children sometimes report experiences or even decisions made before their current birth.
Likely.
The sources mention one example, a boy named Lee, who apparently recalled consciously deciding that he wanted to be reborn onto Earth and feeling that other beings, other entities, were actually assisting him in making that choice.
A memory of choosing to come back.
Yeah.
And didn't the Patrick Christensen case, the one with the birthmarks, also have a memory that seemed to fit this category?
It did, yes, a rather specific one. Patrick reported having a conversation in what he called heaven with a relative he referred to as Billy the Pirate.
Billy the Pirate.
Yes. And according to Patrick, this Billy told him that he, Billy, had been shot and died up in the mountains. Now, Patrick's mother had never heard of any relative with that nickname or that story.
Right.
But when she later asked her own mother about it, her mother confirmed that, yes, they did have a cousin who was nicknamed Billy the Pirate, and he had indeed been shot and killed in the mountains, exactly as Patrick had described.
Wow. So a small, verifiable detail about a deceased relative that the immediate family didn't even know, embedded within this claimed memory of a spiritual realm before his own birth.
Exactly. It adds another really intriguing layer to the puzzle these cases present. It suggests that the source of information, if these memories are genuine, might not always be limited to just a single prior human life.
It definitely complicates any simple explanation, doesn't it?
It certainly seems to. It points towards potentially broader sources of consciousness or information beyond just linear reincarnation.
Okay, so we've looked at the research into these spontaneous memories in children. We've examined some really compelling cases, the physical evidence aspect. But naturally, any exploration of a topic like this has to squarely face the skepticism, the criticisms, and the alternative hypotheses that people propose to explain these phenomena away.
Absolutely. And the researchers themselves, like Stevenson and Tucker, engage directly with these objections in their work. It's a crucial part of the scientific process.
So what's one of the main challenges?
Well, a primary one comes from the standard materialist perspective in science. The argument is basically, we shouldn't even seriously consider something like reincarnation because there's simply no known physical or biological mechanism for it. How could consciousness possibly survive without a brain? How could it somehow influence a developing fetus?
Right, the how question. And how do the sources, the researchers, respond to that?
They often draw a parallel to the history of science, particularly medicine. They point out that we've often observed phenomena and even utilized treatments effectively long before we fully understood the underlying mechanisms. Think about aspirin used for decades before we knew exactly how it worked.
So not knowing the how doesn't automatically mean it's impossible.
That's their counterargument. The lack of a known mechanism doesn't necessarily invalidate the observed phenomena from their perspective. It just means there's more to understand.
What about the argument based on global population growth? You hear this one a lot. There are far more people alive today than ever before, so how could everyone have had a past life? Where do all the extra souls come from?
That's a common objection. The sources suggest a few potential ways this could be accounted for, often drawing on information reported in other contexts, like the hypnosis work we'll discuss later.
Okay.
One idea is that some individuals currently alive might be new souls experiencing Earth for the first time. Another possibility is that new conscious entities are continuously being created. And perhaps not all souls choose to reincarnate onto Earth immediately or at all. Some might exist in other states or realms between lives, or choose not to return for long periods.
So it's not necessarily a one-to-one transfer for the entire population at all times.
Exactly. The models derived from reported experiences allow for more flexibility than that simple calculation implies.
Okay, another big one for skeptics is the clear link between brain function and consciousness. We see this dramatically in conditions like Alzheimer's or brain injury, where damage to the brain leads to profound loss of memory, personality, identity. Doesn't that prove consciousness is just a product of the brain?
That's a very strong argument, and the evidence for brain dependence is undeniable. However, researchers like Jim Tucker offer a nuanced interpretation. He suggests that while this evidence clearly shows the brain is necessary for consciousness and memory to manifest in our physical world.
Like a receiver for a signal.
Precisely. It doesn't definitively prove that the brain creates or produces consciousness, memory, and personality in the first place. He uses that analogy. If you damage a radio receiver, you lose the music. But the radio broadcast signal itself might still exist independently out there. The brain could be the vehicle, not the ultimate source.
That's an interesting distinction. What about simpler explanations? Could these kids just have vivid imaginations? Are they making it up, maybe influenced by stories they've overheard? Or is it just coincidence hitting the mark sometimes?
For very vague claims, sure, those explanations are definitely plausible. But the research, according to the sources, suggests that the children reporting these specific, detailed memories aren't inherently more prone to fantasy or lying than other children.
Okay.
And when you're faced with the sheer accumulation of highly specific, verifiable details, names, addresses, obscure facts about a deceased person's life, their profession, their family relationships, the exact manner of their death, and you couple that with unusual behaviors like phobias that match, or especially those correlating physical birthmarks, well, coincidence or simple imagination starts to look like a less and less adequate explanation for all the data points matching up so precisely in the strongest cases.
It stretches credulity after a point.
It becomes statistically improbable, let's say.
Then there's another alternative hypothesis, the super psi idea. Could the child somehow be gaining all this knowledge through some form of extrasensory perception like telepathy, clairvoyance, maybe picking it up from the minds of the deceased person's living relatives, or just reading the information psychically? Not actually remembering being that person.
Yes, super psi, or sometimes called survival without survival, is a prominent alternative explanation discussed within parapsychology. The idea is that the child has exceptional psychic abilities and is essentially accessing information remotely.
But the reincarnation researchers find issues with that too.
They do. The sources outline several reasons why super psi is also problematic as a complete explanation for these cases. First, and perhaps most significantly, it doesn't really account for the physical birthmarks matching specific injuries. How does telepathy or clairvoyance cause a physical mark to appear on a baby in the womb?
Good point.
Second, it doesn't fully explain the child's deep, unwavering conviction, that subjective feeling that they are that previous person. They don't just know about Carcass. Kemal felt he was Carcass.
Yeah.
It's an identity claim, not just an information claim.
Right, the sense of personal identity.
Exactly. And finally, these children typically don't demonstrate other unrelated psychic abilities in other areas of their lives. If they possess such extraordinary broad psi capacities to glean all this specific historical information, you might expect them to show other unusual psychic talents, but that generally doesn't seem to be the case.
So after carefully examining the data, the strongest cases, and weighing the difficulties with these various alternative explanations, fraud, fantasy, coincidence, supersidal, what is the hypothesis that researchers like Stevenson and Tucker ultimately propose as being most consistent with the evidence they've gathered from these spontaneous childhood cases?
They propose what they often refer to as the most parsimonious, or perhaps the most restrained hypothesis that seems to fit all the observed facts. And that is the idea that mind or consciousness is not solely a product of the physical brain,
Right.
that it can, in fact, exist independently of a physical body, persisting after biological death, and can then subsequently attach to or associate with a new physical body in a new life.
And it carries things over.
Yes. This persistent consciousness carries with it aspects of the previous personality, including specific memories, emotional patterns, learned behaviors, preferences, unresolved traumas, and even somehow influences that result in physical correlates like birthmarks matching past injuries. The child identifies so strongly with the previous person because in this model, they are essentially the same continuous conscious entity experiencing a new chapter.
That hypothesis, if correct, certainly shifts the very foundation of how we typically think about consciousness, identity, and the relationship between mind and body.
It absolutely does. It requires us to seriously entertain possibilities that go beyond a purely materialist understanding of ourselves, based on the patterns observed in these meticulously documented cases over decades.
Okay, now moving beyond these spontaneous memories that just seem to pop up in young children, the sources also explore another pathway that's sometimes used, perhaps more deliberately, to try and access information about potential past experiences. and that's hypnosis.
Right. Hypnosis, specifically age regression therapy, is a technique used quite commonly in psychotherapy. Therapists use it to help patients uncover the potential roots of current problems, maybe deep-seated phobias, emotional blocks, dependencies, even unexplained physical symptoms, by guiding them back through their personal history in a relaxed state.
And the idea is that sometimes, during these hypnotic regressions, patients access experiences or memories that they perceive as being from lives other than their current one.
Exactly. Under hypnosis, the subconscious mind can produce incredibly vivid imagery, strong emotions, and detailed narratives that seem completely unrelated to the person's known current life history. They might suddenly see themselves in a different time period, a different body, experiencing events from another era.
Now, the sources are quite careful here, pointing out a major challenge for therapists.
Critically important, yes. The therapist and indeed the person experiencing it faces a significant challenge. It is notoriously difficult, maybe even impossible within the hypnotic state itself to definitively distinguish between several possibilities. Is this a purely symbolic expression of a current problem, like a vivid dream?
Right.
Is it a reconstruction of forgotten, maybe fragmented actual memories from this life? Is the mind simply generating new imaginative content, false memories, perhaps influenced by the therapeutic context or cultural ideas? Or is it an actual memory fragment surfacing from a previous life?
That inherent uncertainty about the source of the information makes many psychotherapists, quite understandably, very cautious about interpreting hypnotic recall as literal historical fact.
Precisely. The scientific verifiability is much more problematic compared to the methods used in the childhood cases, where you have spontaneous statements made before any research, often with specific, checkable details. With hypnosis, suggestibility and fantasy are always potential confounders.
However, the sources also note something interesting about the practical outcome.
Yes. Despite the uncertainty about the literal truth or origin of these experiences, the sources note that engaging with this material in regression hypnosis often leads to surprisingly rapid and effective resolution of the patient's actual psychological problems or symptoms.
So whether it's real or symbolic, accessing it seems to help therapeutically.
Often, yes. It seems that processing the narrative and emotions, whatever their ultimate source, can be very healing for the individual.
Occasionally, just like with the child cases, specific, potentially verifiable details do emerge during these hypnotic regressions.
Sometimes, yes. The sources mention the case of a woman named Annabelle, reported by a therapist named Tatjana Radovanovich Kukler. Annabelle wasn't seeking therapy for a problem. She underwent regression hypnosis simply out of curiosity about past lives.
What?
During the session, she vividly experienced herself as a married woman living somewhere, she thought, in the 1940s. She experienced receiving the devastating news that her husband had died in some kind of submarine or boat accident at sea, and she recalled a specific name and a date associated with this event.
And did she try to check this information afterwards?
She did. After the session, she went and researched the name and date that had come up so strongly in the hypnosis, and she actually found a historical record of a real person who lived in Canada in the 1940s whose life circumstances seemed to match the description she had experienced.
Wow. And what did Annabelle make of that?
Well, for her personally, this experience, combined with finding that potentially corroborating detail, was deeply convincing. She became certain in her own mind that she was an eternal soul, and interestingly, she came to believe that her current brother, with whom she felt a very close bond, was actually the same soul as the husband she had experienced losing in that 1940s regression.
So a powerful personal experience, but the sources are careful to frame it how.
They're very clear in stating that these kinds of hypnotic cases, even with potentially verifiable details, are not considered definitive scientific proof of reincarnation in the same way the systematically investigated child cases might be argued to be. They serve more as compelling anecdotal reports that align with, and perhaps lend support to, the broader hypothesis of consciousness persisting beyond a single lifetime. They add to the overall picture, but aren't conclusive in themselves.
That makes sense. Now, shifting slightly within this realm of hypnosis, the sources also touch on its use for accessing not just potential past lives, but even memories from before birth, prenatal memories.
Yes, this is another fascinating area. The work of people like Dr. David Cheek, who is actually an obstetrician, as mentioned. He used hypnosis to help some patients retrieve apparent memories from their time in the womb.
Memories from the womb. That sounds incredible. What kind of memories are we talking about? Could they be verified?
Some apparently were, yes. One case cited is of a little girl who, under hypnosis, recalled her mother wearing a very specific dress, dark green plaid, during the pregnancy. And she also recalled hearing her mother say a specific phrase, "It has to be a girl. It just has to be."
And the mother confirmed this.
Apparently, yes. Her mother was later able to confirm both the dress and having said that exact phrase during the time she was pregnant with the girl.
That definitely challenges the standard view, doesn't it? The idea that babies before or at birth aren't really capable of forming, storing, and later retrieving such specific, detailed memories.
It really does. She came to believe that the fetal experience wasn't just passive. He thought it involved a kind of ongoing, perhaps extrasensory, perception of the mother's thoughts, emotions, and the surrounding environment. This work, accessing memories seemingly from the womb, aligns quite well with the ideas emerging from pioneers in the field of perinatal psychology like Wendy Ann McCarty.
And McCarty's work suggests that a baby's developing self-awareness isn't purely a product of the developing brain, is that right?
That's her perspective, yes. She introduces the concept of what she calls a transcendental self. This is proposed as an aspect of our consciousness that exists independently of the physical body, maybe even prior to conception.
The transcendental self.
Yes. It's described as being non-local, meaning not confined to the brain or body. And this transcendental self is thought to be the core entity that ensures the continuity of identity across different lifetimes, essentially viewing the physical body as a temporary vehicle for experience and learning.
So how does that relate to the normal sense of self, the ego, that we experience day to day?
McCarty suggests that our familiar human ego, our personality as we know it, is more anchored in the brain's neurobiological processes. But our full integrated sense of self is actually a combination, a blend of both this brain-based ego and this deeper, non-local, transcendental self.
So even from conception, or maybe even earlier, there might be a conscious, non-physical component already present, contributing to our identity and experience.
That's the implication of this perspective. It suggests a much earlier and more fundamental role for consciousness than just assuming it arises solely from brain activity after birth.
This connection between consciousness, memory, and experiences potentially beyond the current life leads us directly into another major area explored in the sources, again using hypnosis, but in a very specific way. This is the work pioneered by Dr. Michael Newton, focusing on accessing reported experiences from the state between physical lives.
Yes, Michael Newton's work is quite distinct. He was a clinical psychologist, started his practice way back in the late 1940s. And like many therapists, he initially used hypnosis in a pretty conventional way for problem solving, addressing phobias, anxieties, that kind of thing.
And his background wasn't particularly spiritual initially.
Not at all. The sources emphasize he was scientifically trained, identified as an atheist, was actually deeply skeptical of anything like past lives or spiritual realms. He initially viewed any such reports that came up in therapy as purely subconscious fantasy or metaphor.
But something changed his perspective quite dramatically through his clinical practice.
It really did. He found that patients, when guided into a very deep state of hypnotic relaxation, would sometimes spontaneously start describing experiences that didn't seem to be from their current life, nor from a previous life on Earth, but from a state after their most recent death and before their current birth.
So experiences from the in-between state.
Exactly. They started describing journeys, encounters with guides or loved ones who had passed, processes of life review, planning for future lives. It wasn't something Newton was looking for or suggesting to them. It just started happening spontaneously and repeatedly.
And the consistency of these unexpected accounts across many different patients eventually convinced him that something significant was going on, something worth investigating systematically.
Yes. Despite his ingrained skepticism, the sheer volume and, more importantly, the striking consistency of these independent reports coming from patients with hugely varied backgrounds, beliefs, cultures, it compelled him to take it seriously. He decided he needed to research this systematically.
So he developed a specific method.
He did. He developed a particular hypnotic protocol designed specifically to guide patients into what he termed a state of appropriate superconsciousness. The goal was to reliably access these purported memories of the spiritual dimension, the life between lives state.
And he gathered a lot of data over the years.
A massive amount. The sources indicate he collected detailed data from thousands of patients over a period of more than 40 years of clinical practice focused on this specific area.
Thousands of cases. And the key finding was the consistency.
That's what Newton emphasized. The remarkable thing, according to the sources summarizing his work, was just how consistent the testimonies were. Regardless of whether the patient came in as an atheist, deeply religious, agnostic, or subscribing to any particular spiritual belief system, or none at all, their descriptions of the core features and stages of the journey between lives followed surprisingly similar patterns.
So for Newton, this extensive body of consistent data gathered over decades allowed him to do what?
He became convinced that his work wasn't just accessing random fantasies, but was actually mapping out, based on empirical data from these hypnotic regressions, the consistent stages of the soul's journey in the afterlife, from the moment of death through to the preparations for reincarnation.
And he also found this work was beneficial for the patients.
Profoundly so, apparently. He concluded that accessing this life between lives state was often even more valuable and healing for his patients than accessing past life memories. It seemed to help them reconnect with what they perceived as their deeper soul identity, their innate wisdom, and gain a much clearer understanding of their current life's purpose and challenges from a higher perspective.
Okay, so based on these thousands of consistent accounts from patients in this deep hypnotic state, what are some of the most commonly reported elements or stages of this journey between lives, according to Newton's research as presented in the sources?
Well, the journey typically begins, according to these accounts, at the moment of death. Patients consistently describe this not with fear, but often with a sense of release, profound peace, sometimes curiosity, even euphoria, as they realize they are separate from their physical body, often floating nearby.
Oh, it's scary.
Generally not. They feel freedom. They might feel some initial frustration at not being able to communicate with grieving loved ones, but they often report staying near for a while, perhaps for the funeral, to offer comfort, knowing, apparently, that they will see these loved ones again, either in the afterlife or in future lives. Then comes the transition.
The tunnel and the light.
Often described that way, yes. Seeing a brilliant, welcoming white light in the distance, being drawn towards it, sometimes through what feels like a dark tunnel or passageway. This is usually accompanied by feelings of immense peace, well-being, and sometimes perceptions of beautiful, calming musical vibrations.
And what happens upon arrival?
They reach a place of arrival and welcome. Here, they are typically greeted with immense love by beings they recognize, often spiritual guides, and also soulmates, friends, relatives from various lifetimes who have passed on before them. It's described as a spectacular, beautiful, comforting place.
The coming home.
That's a very common description, an overwhelming feeling of finally coming home. They fully realize their physical body is gone and accept this new state of being. The reunion is joyful. Guides and loved ones often wait near the doorway to reassure the newly arrived soul and help them adapt. These beings might appear as pure energy or adopt familiar human forms from past lives to aid recognition. Souls themselves are often described as androgynous, but can appear masculine or feminine.
Is there a period of sort of recovery?
Yes, often there's a phase described as transition or healing, sometimes involving what feels like a healing bath of light or energy. This is to help the soul recover from any physical ailments or traumas from the life just ended, and also to process the emotional trauma of leaving loved ones and the life behind.
And then some kind of review process.
Right. Guided by their personal spiritual guide, the soul typically undergoes an orientation and life review. In this state, they apparently have access to all the memories of the life they just completed, but can view them from a much broader, more objective spiritual perspective. The soul analyzes its choices and experiences, comparing them to the plan or program it had set out for itself before incarnating.
And they aren't alone in this realm. You mentioned guides and soul groups.
Exactly. They often rejoin their soul group, which is consistently described as their real family, a core cluster, maybe 3 to 25 entities, of roughly the same spiritual level, who tend to incarnate together repeatedly across many lives, supporting each other's growth and learning. There are also reports of larger group meetings, sometimes involving over 1,000 souls. It's a very communal environment focused on sharing and exchange.
And the spiritual guides play a key role.
A very close and consistent role, according to the accounts. They are with the soul during incarnations, helping them try to follow their life plan, and are very present in the spiritual realm. There seem to be different levels of guides, assigned based on the soul's own level of development, usually one main guide per soul group, but also interactions with more advanced guides and sometimes beginner guides assisting them.
Okay, so after review and reconnection, eventually the focus shifts towards the future, towards potentially coming back.
Yes, that's a significant phase described in nearly all the accounts, the process of choosing a new life. This is presented not as something imposed, but as a conscious choice made by the soul in collaboration with its guides and soul group members. The decision is based entirely on the soul's perceived evolutionary needs, what lessons still need to be learned for spiritual growth.
What are the key considerations in making that choice?
Patients consistently report asking themselves, or being asked, three key questions. First, am I truly ready for another demanding physical incarnation? Second, what specific lessons or experiences do I need to focus on this time around? And third, what kind of environment, what identity, what challenges would best help me achieve those specific learning goals?
The sources mention something about presenting this plan to a council.
Yes, often the soul's proposed plan or project for the next life is then submitted to or discussed with a council group, sometimes called the Council of Elders. These are described as highly evolved, wise, compassionate beings. Their role is not to judge, but to offer guidance, perspective, and support, helping the soul refine its plan and understand the potential karmic implications or challenges involved, especially in working through persistent negative patterns or tendencies.
And is there a way to sort of preview potential lives?
Apparently so. Many accounts describe going to a place of selection. This is often depicted metaphorically, sometimes like a movie theater or a library, where the soul can view scenes or possibilities from potential future lives that align with their learning objectives. They don't see everything, can't know all the details, but they get a sense, a global map or general life plan based on the choices they make there.
And a huge part of that choice is the body itself.
Absolutely. The choice of body is described as being of major importance. This choice is influenced partly by karma, the principle of causality, where past thoughts, words, actions create effects that shape future experiences, but primarily by the learning needs. Interestingly, the accounts consistently suggest that choosing difficult lives, or even bodies with significant imperfections or disabilities, is sometimes done deliberately because these challenges are seen as opportunities for faster, more focused spiritual progress.
That's a challenging idea for many.
It is, definitely. And tied to that is the selection of psychological traits, choosing inherent tendencies or personality characteristics that will best equip the soul to meet its chosen goals and challenges in the upcoming life.
And then there's the choice of family.
Yes, the choice of parents and family environment is described as an absolutely essential part of the pre-life planning. The accounts acknowledge how difficult this concept can be for people who feel like innocent victims of abusive or neglectful parents. However, the consistent message reported is that these choices are made by the soul for growth purposes, and that souls always retain free will and possess the inner tools and resilience needed to overcome hardship and ultimately realize their plans, even if the path is incredibly difficult.
And they also coordinate with others who will be in their life.
Crucially, yes. There's a process of synchronizing with others. The soul must coordinate its plan with the souls of loved ones, future siblings, friends, spouses, even key adversaries sometimes, who are part of its soul group and will play significant roles in the upcoming life scenario. This is a mutual agreement. The soul also agrees to play roles in their life plans.
So it's all interconnected. How do they recognize these important soul connections when they meet them down here on Earth, usually with amnesia about all this planning?
That's addressed too. The accounts describe going to a place of recognition before reincarnating. Here, specific signs or cues are somehow encoded into the soul's memory. These cues are designed to trigger moments of deep, often inexplicable recognition when they encounter members of their soul group at key moments in the new life.
What kind of signs?
Often sensory things, a particular look in someone's eyes, the sound of their laugh, maybe seeing them wear a piece of jewelry, a scent, a feeling of immediate familiarity. The recognition of a primary soulmate or romantic partner is frequently described as being particularly intense, often instantaneous, and feeling almost magical or like destiny.
And then finally, the process of actually returning.
Yes, the reincarnation itself. The soul typically bids farewell to friends and guides in the spiritual realm, is often escorted by its guide towards the transition point, sometimes described as taking a tunnel again. Then it merges with the energy field and developing brain of a specific fetus, usually, according to Newton's subjects, around the 4th or 5th month of pregnancy.
Merging with the baby's brain.
Yes. There's a process of becoming accustomed to the host brain, learning to work with its unique structure, while still retaining its identity as a conscious soul. Then, usually after birth, the veil of amnesia descends, blocking conscious recall of the between-life state and previous lives. The idea presented is that the immortal character of the soul then combines with the temporary human spirit or personality potentials of the host body to create the new, unique personality for that specific lifetime.
It's an incredibly detailed, intricate, and remarkably consistent narrative of a purposeful spiritual journey that emerges from these deep, hypnotic states
Ooh.
across thousands of individuals, according to Newton's work.
It really is. It stands as a significant body of reported human experience that, while obviously different in its methodology and verifiability compared to the spontaneous childhood cases, offers a coherent and consistent framework for exploring what might consciously happen in the period between physical lives.
So looking back at this whole deep dive then, we've journeyed from the systematic research into children's spontaneous claims of past lives, looked at some truly compelling case studies with surprising details and physical evidence. We've touched on the significant skepticism and the various alternative explanations that these phenomena understandably raise.
Which are important to consider.
Absolutely. And then finally, we delved into these profound and, again, strikingly consistent accounts of a potential conscious journey between lives, primarily accessed through these specific techniques of spiritual hypnosis pioneered by Newton.
It's clear, I think, that these are incredibly complex areas of study and also areas of deep personal belief for many. They challenge our most fundamental assumptions about consciousness, about memory, identity, life, death.
They really do. The sources we've looked at present just a fascinating array of data points and reported experiences that, frankly, resist easy dismissal or simple explanation.
They certainly invite us to, at the very least, question the adequacy of a purely materialist worldview and consider the possibility that consciousness is perhaps a much broader, more fundamental, and more mysterious phenomenon than we might typically assume.
So as you, listening, reflect on everything we've discussed today, the children's memories, the birthmarks, the hypnotic regressions, the life between lives, accounts what stands out most strongly to you. How do these ideas resonate with, or perhaps challenge, your own understanding of what we are, where we come from, and what might happen beyond a single lifetime?
It's a lot to take in and raises so many questions.
It really does. And perhaps that leaves us with a final thought to carry forward, something to mull over based on everything these sources suggest. If consciousness can indeed exist, retain complex information, carry aspects of identity, and potentially even influence physical form outside of and beyond a single physical body, what are the ultimate implications of that? How does that change our understanding of life, death, memory, who we truly are as individuals, and maybe most importantly, our connection to each other?
It's a question that really opens up vast possibilities for contemplation, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.